Welcome everyone. So you have almost finished the chapter 1. You're in the last video of it now. We're going to talk about some infectious diseases. An infectious disease is something that happens when a pathogen is able to overcome your host's resistance. So your immune system, including things like your B cells and T cells that can fight infections, your complement, or just your skin and mucous membranes that prevent things from getting in. If the pathogen is able to overcome that, it's going to end up growing and causing a disease until either treatment or the host immune system is able to get that infection under control. Within the definition of infectious disease is this category of emerging infectious diseases. So these are diseases that are either new, so emerging means new, or it could be diseases that are suddenly, we're seeing them in new numbers and higher numbers or in new places or in new ways. So there's something new about this infectious disease. Some things that can lead to an EID, one would be evolution. So every time a bacteria or a virus replicates its DNA, there's a chance that it mutates something, that something isn't copied correctly. And sometimes a mutation could lead to something that's slightly different. And over time, if you think of how quickly a bacteria is replicating itself, once an hour, some bacteria even as fast as every 20 minutes, how many replications it could do in a day, there's a chance for a lot of mutations to build up pretty quickly. One would be new diseases that spread to new locations. So we have the ability to travel, around the world very quickly. Someone could be exposed to something and take it to a new place. Deforestation, construction, even something like global warming that could take something that was isolated in a small area and now it can spread. It's, have people coming into areas, interacting with, a possible pathogen that was not exposed to people before. Antimicrobial resistance. So this could be from just the bacteria having some, or your pathogen having some small mutation, or even picking up something from another pathogen. That means that the bacteria is no longer going to be killed by the antibiotic like you would have liked it to be. So when I think of drug resistance, the first one I think of is MRSA. MRSA stands for methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus. So Staphylococcus aureus is a bacteria that's pretty prevalent on a lot of people. But this isn't just Staphylococcus aureus. This is a resistant bacteria that has now developed the resistance to the antibiotic methicillin. So if we go back in time to the 1940s, World War II, penicillin was being tested and started becoming available for people to use. And it was very not used correctly in a lot of cases. So people would take it for something that it wasn't necessary for. So like if you had a cold, an antibiotic isn't going to help it. People would take it in doses that weren't appropriate or not finish their dosing. Or even putting it in, like putting antibiotics in animal feed or something like that can allow the bacteria that are able to overcome that allow the bacteria that can overcome the antibiotic, they're suddenly able to grow. So penicillin starts being used in the 1940s, used vastly inappropriately sometimes, and by the 1950s we had penicillin resistance. So when the bacteria were resistant to penicillin, we had to start using another drug. So we started using methicillin. By the 1980s, methicillin resistance emerged. Our last line of defense against this bacteria is an antibiotic known as vancomycin. Vancomycin is very strong, can have some side effects to it. By the 1990s, we started seeing MRSA that were also resistant to vancomycin. So if you have a bacteria that is resistant to a lot of different antibiotics, it is going to be very hard to treat that bacteria. So within the vancomycin resistance, we have two kind of sub-definitions. We have VISA, which is an intermediate resistance, and VRSA, which is resistance. So VISA, that intermediate resistance, means the antibiotic isn't really working well, but it's not totally resistant yet. And VRSA means it's not killing it at any levels that could be considered resistant. So at that point, the vancomycin isn't killing it at levels that could be considered actually overcoming the bacteria. So a lot of things, if you were dealing with some MRSA or something like that, you are going to need to be very careful to, wash your hands so it doesn't spread to another person. We don't want drug-resistant bacteria spreading. You're going to need to be, use things like alcohol and bleach to kill pathogens on surfaces that aren't going to leave a biofilm behind to allow something resistant to start growing. Another one you may have heard of is C. diff, especially if you work in like a hospital or a nursing home kind of setting. You've probably heard of C. diff because this is really the areas where C. diff is almost always going to occur. And the reason for that is C. diff is pretty naturally antibiotic resistant. It's also in a lot of people's intestinal tracts. And so if someone is on antibiotics, it could kill some of those bacteria in their microbiome. So you may have been told to do something like eat yogurt when you take an antibiotic before. If someone is on antibiotics for a long time, a lot of strong antibiotics, there's a chance that it could impact a lot of their microbiome. And so if that person has lost a lot of the microbes in their intestines, they probably have not lost their C. diff because C. diff is so resistant. And that C. diff now has the run of the place. There's not a lot of competition from other bacteria. So C. diff can start growing and its little baby C. diff cells can start taking over and growing at wildly inappropriate levels throughout that patient's intestines and lead to an antibiotic resistant form of diarrhea. Another one is tuberculosis. Tuberculosis has been in the news in the United States. I want to say like 2024 it was in the news some. It is a global threat, but currently is having a resurgence in the United States. About 8% of cases in the USA are drug resistant. So there is a standard treatment for tuberculosis. And if it becomes drug resistant, then you're going to have to turn to much more expensive types of care routines. When we're talking about spreading to new locations, one I think of is Zika. So Zika is not a new virus. It has been known since the 1940s in Uganda, but then it spread in the past 20 years or so. It's been spreading outside of Uganda. So we found it in Micronesia in 2007. A big deal when it made its way to Brazil because Brazil was hosting the Olympics at that time. So there was a lot of concern about, people from around the world were going to be together. How are we going to prevent that from spreading? And then we saw it spread to the United States in 2016. And the way that it spreads is through a mosquito bite. So this type of mosquito, the Aedes mosquito, can carry this virus. And then if it bites a person, it then transfers that virus into the person. A less common way is that this disease can also spread through sexual contact. And for most people, Zika is not a hugely devastating disease. It's going to be kind of similar to the flu. But one way it can be devastating is if someone is pregnant when they are sick with this virus, because that virus can affect the growing fetus. It can cause a birth defect known as microcephaly, which means the brain, micro tells you small, so they end up with a very small brain and a very small head, and the resulting neurological, intellectual defects that can go along with that. Another one is Ebola. So Ebola virus is named after the Ebola River where it was found. It has been known of, we've known about this virus for a long time also. But this virus, the Ebola virus, causes Ebola hemorrhagic fever, which causes fever, hemorrhaging, which is bleeding, and blood clotting where it shouldn't be clotting. And it is transmitted through contact with either infected blood, so that could be something like a needle being shared between people. It could be a deceased person, being prepared for funeral and someone coming in contact with their infected body fluids. You can see I've got some statistics over some different outbreaks. I won't ask you specifics about these outbreaks, but you can just see we've had a few pop up over, every few years or so. And anywhere from like a third to around probably a half to 2/3 of people die in most outbreaks. So this is a pretty severe infection. The only person in the United States that has had Ebola was someone who contracted it in another country and then came here to be treated. We don't actually we have not seen an outbreak of Ebola within the United States as of the time I'm filming this video. Another one is Bovine spongiform encephalopathy. That's a really fun word to say. Some big words here. Bovine means cow. Spongiform, I want you to think of like what a sponge looks like. It's got all those kind of holes in it. And then encephalopathy means your brain. So it doesn't mean, when we're talking about your brain being like a sponge, I don't mean like it can soak up knowledge. I mean like it has holes in it. It can impact, cause damage to your brain. A more common name for bovine spongiform encephalopathy is mad cow. You may have heard of that. And one thing interesting about mad cow is that it's not caused by a bacteria. It's not caused by a virus. All these pathogens we just studied, it's caused by a protein, just a protein by itself. But it's not a normal protein. This is a protein that has been damaged, that it does not fold itself correctly. And when that protein gets around the correctly folded protein, it damages them also. So before long, there's none of the healthy protein available in that person's brain. They're all being converted almost as soon as they're made, being converted into the unhealthy form of it. This infectious protein, this is called a prion or a prion. The human form of mad cow is CJD or Creutzfeldt-Jakob, and this is caused by, if you eat beef that has been infected with the prion, then that prion can get into your body and misfold the proteins and cause a disease in your body. Also, sometimes it could be caused by like contaminated surgical instruments or a transplant from someone. Also, rarely, there are some prion diseases that can be genetic. I don't think mad cow is genetic for people, though. E. coli 0157H7. So we're going to see a few diseases through the semester that have O's or H's or other numbers and letters. These stand for different types of that. So it's not just regular E. coli, it's like this special type of E. coli. We'll talk more about like what those O's and the H's, what those antigens are. It's differences in some of the proteins and sugars and things that we'll see on our different bacteria. So E. coli 0157H7. This isn't just normal good old E. coli in your body helping make vitamin K. This is one that has picked up these extra genes, and what these extra genes do is they produce a toxin. And that toxin causes your colon to secrete water, which leads to diarrhea. E. coli 0157H7 is the leading cause of diarrhea around the world. You might have heard of it as Montezuma's Revenge, or there's lots of kind of nicknames for this. You may have been told some places in the world where you travel, you need to boil the water. You shouldn't just drink the water that's there because of the chances of consuming this. And diarrhea might sound like a disease that is unpleasant, but ultimately not terrible, because we have access to sewage treatment and clean water and things like that. Worldwide, though, diarrhea is one of the leading causes of death of children. So this is not something that we can underestimate the importance of. Another one we see is MERS, Middle East Respiratory Syndrome. This is something we saw about 10 years ago, caused by a type of coronavirus called Middle East Respiratory Syndrome coronavirus, similar to SARS, which is another acute respiratory syndrome. So these cause lower respiratory infections and symptoms. Another one, probably the more common coronavirus you've heard of, is COVID-19. So that 19 stands for the year 2019, when this virus arose by genetic mutation. It did not exist before the year 2019. The virus was able to spread very quickly around the world and was declared a pandemic, which means a worldwide, it was causing infections around the world at epidemic levels by March 2020. And it is caused by the virus called Severe Acute Respiratory Coronavirus 2, or SARS-CoV-2. So that's SARS, just the same as the previous slide. Just the same as the previous slide, the SARS that we're talking about here. There have been more than 6.9 million deaths. Possibly by the time you watch this, 7 or even 8 million deaths worldwide. It's transmitted through airborne transmission. You might remember when it was first a problem, we didn't yet know much about it. So we didn't know, did you need to social distance? If it can stay in the air, social distancing isn't going to help you, because someone could have been there an hour ago and it'd still be in the dust. If it's airborne, wearing a mask would help, because that's going to stop it from coming out of your body. Do you need to bleach your cereal boxes? Do you need to, spray everything with Lysol? You might have remembered a lot of confusion about how we need to prevent it. At this point, we do know, though, it's prevented by, or it is transmitted through an airborne transmission. And so things like wearing a mask are really important to prevent it from leaving your body in the form of, air droplets as you're coughing or talking. For most people, especially if you're younger, this presents as a common cold, but the symptoms can be as severe as respiratory failure, and the rates of death tend to be higher in older people. So especially if you're around older people, you need to make sure those proper precautions are being taken. One effect of COVID, some people develop what's called long COVID, and long COVID can last years. This is something that's still being studied because 2019 was not that long ago. We don't have like decades of research because it's not been around for decades. So this is something we're still trying to find out what long COVID actually could cause, or if it can be treated, or how. One nice thing, though, is that there is a vaccine available. The vaccine reduces your chance of being infected with it, and if you are infected, it reduces your chance of having the more severe illness. When we're talking about flu, there's a couple of types of flu I want to mention. And you'll see these also have H and N's and some numbers with them. Those, just like similar to what we were just talking about, E. coli, these are different types of the flu, so different kind of versions of this virus within that category. And we'll come back and kind of investigate those H's and N's later. H1N1 is known as swine flu. Swine meaning like pigs, yes, pigs. Because flu virus most commonly lives in people, pigs, and birds. That's where we see it most commonly. And so H1N1 was called swine flu, and this was found in the United States in 2009. It was also pandemic, a large worldwide outbreak. There was a vaccine, a second flu vaccine everyone was able to get that year if they were interested in protecting themselves from that. Avian influenza A, or H5N1 flu, is one that is primarily found in birds. So waterfowl, poultry, we're seeing it in also cattle. This is one that, as the name implies, it's not yet really found a lot in people. You may have heard it in the news recently because it has been in the news. It's a pretty relevant recent disease that we've been hearing about. We aren't yet seeing human-to-human transmission, so that means people who are sick with it don't seem to be transmitting it to other people. Mainly the people who get sick with this have been in contact with, they are farmers raising poultry. They are wildlife researchers or hunters and interacting with birds in the wild. And that's kind of an important thing to notice because not having it spread person to person keeps the numbers of it down. If it were to mutate, and it can mutate, so it's not really a matter of if it could, but when it could. When it mutates to be able to be spread human to human, that we could see a lot more numbers of this suddenly showing up. And so there is a lot of current research going on into influenza A to be able to protect us, have a vaccine ready and a treatment ready if and when that human-to-human transmission occurs. HIV is one you may have heard of. HIV is a virus, human immunodeficiency virus, that causes a disease known as AIDS, or acquired immunodeficiency syndrome. So this is an STI, that means sexually transmitted infection, that affects males and females. I have these two symbols here, STI and STD. STI stands for sexually transmitted infection, whereas STD stands for sexually transmitted disease. The preferred terminology here is STI because someone could be infected with this virus. They could have an infection without showing signs or symptoms, without having a disease. So STI is that phrase we're going to use. So HIV, AIDS, this is a worldwide epidemic. The numbers are probably higher by the time you're watching this. 39 million people, over 39 million people have been infected with this. Although in recent years, new infections have been declining, in the United States, we still continue to see pretty high levels in the South. And the thing with this virus is what it does is it destroys your T cells. T cells, your helper T cells are part of your immune system that help protect you from other infections. So when this virus was first being noticed in the 1980s, although the virus existed before then, it really became a problem first in the 1980s. What we were seeing was a lot of people, especially people like in their 20s and 30s who should have been young and strong and healthy, they were suddenly getting very rare diseases like some cancers and some fungal infections that we typically only saw in older immune compromised people. And so that became the way that we were able to start really tracking where HIV was because of these cancers and these fungal infections we were seeing. Now there are drugs that can help prevent the spread of HIV and AIDS. So whether that's using a condom to prevent fluids transferring from one person to another, or even prophylactic drugs that before infection can prevent it from getting into a cell, to drugs that someone who is infected can keep the virus levels low. So it's not the death sentence that it once was. MPOX, you may have heard of monkeypox. That's what it was previously called. Now the preferred terminology is MPOX. This is one of those pox virus diseases related to smallpox. It causes a flu-like illness, a rash, very similar to smallpox, although smallpox has now been eradicated. The way we first treated this was some smallpox vaccines and drugs were able to treat MPOX, although we have more specific MPOX treatments available now. This was declared a global health emergency in 2022, and it is spread through human-to-human direct contact. That means skin-to-skin, usually prolonged skin-to-skin contact, in contact with someone, their rash onto, like physically touching your body. Measles is one that is very relevant right now. So the United States had a measles elimination status. That means that we were not seeing cases of measles in the United States because the United States had successfully vaccinated most people in it. But in the last year, in 2025, we had over 2,000 cases of measles in the United States, including cases here in Tennessee, and 3 confirmed deaths in the United States. So we are now at risk of losing that measles elimination status. A lot of that is due to vaccine hesitancy. So it is a vaccine preventable disease. After 2 doses of the vaccine, it is 97% effective at preventing infections. But because there weren't cases around, people got kind of a little bit lazy. Because why should I get vaccinated for a disease I can't get, right? So vaccine rates dipped. There is a healthy amount, an unhealthy amount of vaccine skepticism. I'm sure if you've been on social media, you've seen at least someone say something skeptical of vaccines. Especially in recent years, there's been a lot of vaccine skepticism, which has further lowered the rate of vaccine. And now that there is a low enough rate of vaccination that it's easy for measles to be traveling through society. Measles is very, very contagious. So if someone is sick with measles, they are going to infect 90% of the unvaccinated people around them. So if we were in a classroom of 10 people who were unvaccinated, 9 of them would be sick with measles after being in contact with someone who is sick. It also lasts in the air, so you don't actually have to be physically next to someone with measles. You could just be where they are 2 hours later and end up with measles yourself. Measles most typically causes a severe rash. It can also cause complications including pneumonia. It can cause pneumonia, which is a lung infection, encephalitis, which is a brain infection. It can lead to deafness. It can lead to a weakened immune system. So your immune system actually kind of forgets how to fight the infections that you've already had. It's like you are starting over again. It can lead to birth defects and even miscarriage of a pregnancy. Okay, so at this point, from your previous lectures, you should be able to remember something about biofilms. What are biofilms doing? Why are they important? We were just talking about infectious disease. Compare that to earlier lectures about your normal microbiota? Can you differentiate between normal microbiome and infectious disease? Can you tell me about some factors that contribute to why infectious diseases are emerging? Can you describe some of those diseases we discussed? So what ones have we seen as a result of antibiotic resistance? What have we seen as a result of genetic changes? Give me some. I'm not going to ask you specific years or numbers, but I do want you to kind of be able to tell me some of those general signs and symptoms, some of the important things we talked about with those different diseases. Okay, I hope that you have enjoyed this first chapter. If you are struggling, if you have questions, please email me, come talk to me in office hours. And I hope you do great on your chapter 1 quiz. I will see you later. Bye.